There is a particular kind of person who walks into a room and gives nothing away. Their face does not announce their mood. Their voice does not betray their intentions. Their eyes do not flicker toward what they want. You have met this person, or you have envied them, or you have feared them. They are not cold by accident. They are cold by design. Everyone else in the room is leaking information through their posture, their tone, their need to be liked, their inability to sit in silence. This person leaks nothing. And in a world built on the exchange of information, the one who reveals the least holds the most power. This is not a personality trait. It is a discipline. It can be built, layer by layer, the way a fortress is built, not to keep beauty in, but to keep intrusion out. Machiavelli understood this 500 years ago, writing not for kings who wanted to be loved, but for those who understood that being read is being controlled. What follows is not a guide to becoming likable. It is a dissection of how the unreadable mind is constructed, and why almost everyone around you is unconsciously begging to be decoded. Section 1. The myth of authenticity. You have been taught repeatedly that being yourself is a virtue, that transparency is honesty, that the more openly you express your thoughts and feelings, the more trustworthy you become. This is one of the most effective control mechanisms ever installed into the collective psyche, because it ensures that the majority of people remain permanently legible to anyone willing to study them. Authenticity, in the way it is marketed, is not freedom, it is exposure. Every emotion you display without filter becomes a data point someone else can use. Every reaction you fail to control becomes a lever. The people who rise to positions of real influence are rarely the most authentic in this performative sense. They are the most selectively revealed. They understand that the self is not something to be broadcast. It is something to be rationed. Section 2. Why predictability is a form of submission. Every relationship, every negotiation, every social interaction is, underneath its civility, a contest of information. The person who can predict the other's next move holds the advantage, regardless of who holds the formal power. When you are predictable, when your face shows exactly what you feel, when your words always match your internal state, when your reactions arrive on schedule, you have handed your opponent the script before the scene has even begun. Predictability is not honesty. It is surrender disguised as sincerity. Machiavelli's entire philosophy of power rests on this asymmetry. The ruler who can be read by his enemies is already half conquered, no matter the size of his army. Section 3. The face as a weapon, not a window. You have likely heard the phrase, "the eyes are the window to the soul." This sentiment is comforting, and it is also a vulnerability. A face that transmits internal states in real time is a face that can be manipulated in real time. Every flinch, every reddening of the skin, every involuntary tightening around the eyes is information handed over for free. The disciplined individual does not attempt to suppress emotion entirely. Suppression creates its own tells, its own tension, its own visible effort. Instead, they train the face to remain in a neutral default state, a kind of resting architecture that requires no active maintenance and therefore betrays no strain. This is not deception in the crude sense. It is architectural control over the only surface that everyone else is reading without permission. Section 4. Silence as strategic currency. In most social environments, Silence is treated as a deficit, something to be filled, smoothed over, apologized for. The person who tolerates silence without rushing to fill it is, in the eyes of the anxious, behaving abnormally. But silence is not absence. It is a vacuum that pulls information out of others. The untrained mind cannot endure a pause. It will talk simply to relieve the discomfort, often revealing intentions, insecurities, or strategies it never meant to disclose. The disciplined individual understands that every unfilled silence is an invitation for someone else to expose themselves. They do not speak to ease tension. They let tension do the work for them. Section 5. The danger of emotional transparency in negotiation. Negotiation, whether it is a business deal, a salary discussion, or a domestic argument, is fundamentally an exercise in concealment and revelation. The party that reveals its true ceiling, its true urgency, or its true desperation first has already lost most of its leverage. Emotional transparency, visible frustration, visible eagerness, visible relief, functions as a real-time leak of your negotiating position. This is why those skilled in negotiation often appear almost bored, unreadable, indifferent to outcomes they actually care deeply about. Their calm is not a reflection of low stakes. It is a calculated refusal to let their face quote a price before their mouth does. Section 6. Why people confuse openness with trustworthiness. There is a deeply ingrained cognitive bias that equates openness with safety. If someone tells you everything, shares every opinion, narrates every emotion, you instinctively categorize them as harmless, even honest. This bias is precisely what manipulators exploit, not by becoming unreadable, but by becoming performatively transparent, flooding you with curated vulnerability so you stop looking for the parts they conceal. True discipline does not mean mimicking this performance. It means understanding that real trust is not built on volume of disclosure. It is built on consistency of behavior over time, which requires far less exposure than people assume. Section 7. The strategic function of ambiguity. Ambiguity is uncomfortable for most people because it denies them the closure their mind craves. But ambiguity, used deliberately, is one of the most powerful tools available to someone who wishes to remain unread. When your position on a matter is ambiguous, others must reveal their own position first in an attempt to draw yours out. When your intentions are ambiguous, others must act cautiously, unable to optimize a strategy against an unknown variable. Machiavelli's princes rarely declared their full intentions even to allies, because clarity, once given, cannot be retracted, and every clear statement becomes a fixed target others can aim at. Section 8. How emotional reactions are used against you. Every time you react visibly, anger, hurt, defensiveness, excitement, you provide the people around you with a map of your psychological weak points. A skilled manipulator does not need to guess what destabilizes you. They simply test different stimuli and observe your face. Once they identify what reliably produces a reaction, that reaction becomes a button they can press whenever it serves them. This is why people who learn to mute their visible emotional responses become significantly harder to manipulate, not because they feel less, but because they have removed the feedback loop, the manipulator depends on to calibrate their tactics. Section 9. The discipline of delayed response. Most people respond to stimuli almost instantly. An insult triggers immediate defense. A compliment triggers immediate gratitude. A question triggers immediate answer. This instant responsiveness, while socially expected, is also a tell. It signals that your reactions are driven by impulse rather than by deliberate evaluation. The disciplined individual inserts a deliberate pause between stimulus and response, not to manufacture mystery, but because that pause genuinely changes the quality of the response, and as a side effect, makes their behavior far harder to predict, since impulsive triggers no longer produce reliable outputs. Section 10. Why Machiavelli distrusted open displays of virtue. Machiavelli observed that rulers who insisted on publicly demonstrating their goodness, their mercy, their generosity, often became targets for exploitation, because their adversaries learned exactly which levers to pull to extract concessions. A ruler whose virtues are known can be manipulated through those very virtues: appeals to mercy, appeals to generosity, appeals to fairness. This same principle applies at the individual level. The more visibly you display your values, the more precisely others can construct appeals designed to exploit them. Concealing your deepest commitments is not hypocrisy. It is the refusal to hand your enemies a manual for manipulating you. Section 11. The power of the unreadable pause before speaking. Observe, in any meeting or negotiation, the difference between someone who speaks immediately after being addressed and someone who allows a beat of silence before responding. The immediate speaker often appears eager, anxious, subordinate, desperate to fill the gap, to prove engagement. The one who pauses, even briefly, projects the opposite, a sense that their words are considered rather than reactive, that they are not governed by the rhythm of the conversation but standing slightly outside it. This pause is rarely about thinking longer. It is about signaling, through timing alone, that you are not controlled by the social pressure to respond on demand. Section 12. Emotional leakage and the anatomy of a tell. In poker, a tell is any involuntary behavior that reveals the strength or weakness of a hand, a change in breathing, a shift in posture, a slight increase in blinking. Human interaction outside of cards operates on the same principle. Your tells are not limited to your face. They live in your speech pace, your hand movements, the frequency with which you check your phone, the topics you avoid. Becoming unreadable requires identifying your own tells before someone else does, because most people go through life utterly unaware of the behavioral signatures they broadcast under stress, signatures that anyone observant enough can learn to read like a second language. Section 13. Why oversharing is a survival strategy for the weak. In many social hierarchies, oversharing functions as an unconscious bid for inclusion, a way of purchasing belonging through vulnerability. The person who shares too much, too quickly, is often signaling a deficit, a need for validation strong enough to override caution. This is precisely why those at the top of power structures tend to share dramatically less than those at the bottom. Restraint is not merely a stylistic preference. It is a structural feature of dominance. Information flows downward from the powerful and upward, in excessive quantities, from those still trying to secure their position. Section 14. The mask as a tool, not a lie. There is a common moral objection to the idea of concealment, that wearing a mask is inherently dishonest. This objection misunderstands the function of the mask. A mask is not a falsehood layered over truth. It is a boundary that determines who is permitted access to the truth and under what conditions. Every functioning society relies on masks. Professionalism is a mask. Diplomacy is a mask. Politeness is a mask. The disciplined individual does not abandon the mask in pursuit of some mythical raw authenticity. They wear it deliberately, understanding precisely which version of themselves is appropriate for which audience, and never confusing the mask for weakness. Section 15. Reading others while remaining unread. Unreadability is only half of the equation. The other half is the capacity to read others without being detected in the act. This requires a peculiar kind of attention, observing microreactions, inconsistencies between words and body language, shifts in tone, while maintaining an outward appearance of calm disengagement. Most people, when they attempt to study someone else, betray their scrutiny through obvious starring, leading questions, or visible curiosity. The disciplined observer studies peripherally, asks questions that appear casual but are surgically targeted, and never allows their analytical posture to become visible, because the moment someone realizes they are being read, they begin performing rather than revealing. Section 16. The strategic use of contradiction. Consistency is generally praised as a virtue, but absolute consistency makes a person entirely predictable, and predictability, as established earlier, is a vulnerability. Machiavelli's princes occasionally behaved in ways that contradicted their established patterns, not out of instability, but as a deliberate strategy to prevent their enemies from constructing an accurate model of their behavior. A small, occasional, controlled contradiction, an unexpected silence where speech was expected, an unexpected generosity where calculation was expected, disrupts the predictive models others have built of you, forcing them to reevaluate constantly rather than coast on assumptions. Section 17. Why vulnerability should be selectively deployed, never default. There is a modern obsession with vulnerability as an unconditional good, but vulnerability deployed indiscriminately is not courage, it is carelessness. True strategic vulnerability is selective, shared deliberately with specific people at specific moments for specific effects, such as building calculated trust or disarming a particular form of suspicion. The undisciplined individual treats vulnerability as a constant emotional leak, available to anyone who asks the right question at the right moment. The disciplined individual treats it as a resource, deployed with the same precision a general deploys reserves, rarely, and only when it changes the outcome of the engagement. Section 18. The body as a second language. Long before words are exchanged, the body has already communicated volumes, posture, gait, the way hands are held, the rate of breathing visible in the rise and fall of the shoulders. Most people never learn to consciously regulate this second language. It runs entirely on autopilot, broadcasting anxiety, submission, irritation, or desire without the person's awareness. Becoming unreadable requires bringing this autopilot under partial conscious control, not to fabricate a false body language, but to neutralize the involuntary signals that would otherwise contradict whatever composed image is being maintained. Section 19. Why Machiavelli warned against trusting appearances. Machiavelli repeatedly warned that those who judge by appearances alone, without verifying through deeper observation, are easily deceived, because appearances are the layer most consciously curated by those who understand power. The unreadable individual exploits this precisely. They understand that most people stop their analysis at the visible layer, accepting calm as evidence of harmlessness, accepting friendliness as evidence of goodwill. The discipline, then, is not only in concealing your own depths, but in recognizing that everyone else's surface is equally curated, and refusing to make decisions based on what is merely shown. Section 20. The cost of being understood too easily. There is a particular danger in being easily understood. It shortens the distance between someone's curiosity about you and their ability to control you. Once a person believes they have you figured out, they stop observing carefully and start acting on assumptions that, if engineered correctly, can be used against them. Remaining slightly incomprehensible, slightly resistant to easy categorization, forces continued observation, continued caution, and continued respect, because uncertainty about a person tends to produce more wariness than certainty about their weakness. Section 21. Emotional regulation as a form of sovereignty. To regulate your emotional expression is, in a very literal sense, to govern yourself rather than be governed by stimuli. The undisciplined person is reactive. Insulted, they snap. Flattered, they soften. Threatened, they panic. Each of these reactions hands temporary control of their internal state to an external actor. The disciplined person treats their emotional responses as territory to be defended, not surrendered on contact. This is not the suppression of feeling in the sense of denial. It is the refusal to let feeling dictate visible behavior, which is the difference between sovereignty and occupation. Section 22. How manipulators identify easy targets. Those who study manipulation closely will tell you that the easiest targets are not the unintelligent. They are the emotionally transparent. A person whose face, voice, and behavior instantly reveal their internal state requires no investigation. The manipulator can read their vulnerabilities within minutes of observation. By contrast, a person who reveals little forces the manipulator to invest significant time and risk in probing for weaknesses, time during which their tactics become visible and their intentions exposed. Unreadability functions in this sense as a deterrent, not because it makes you invulnerable, but because it makes you expensive to exploit. Section 23. The discipline of withholding the first move. In any contest, verbal, strategic, or interpersonal, the party that moves first often reveals their priorities, their urgency, and their strategy before the other party has committed to anything. Machiavelli's princes were notorious for allowing rivals to make the first move, observing the consequences and adjusting accordingly. This same principle applies in ordinary interactions. The person who waits, who lets the other party speak first, propose first, react first, retains the advantage of acting with more information than they revealed. Patience, in this context, is not passivity. It is the deliberate refusal to be the first to expose a position. Section 24. Why composure under provocation signals dominance. When provoked, insulted, mocked, challenged, the instinctive response is immediate emotional escalation. But escalation signals that the provocateur has successfully located a lever inside you. Composure under provocation does the opposite. It signals that the provocation failed to penetrate, which is often more destabilizing to an aggressor than open conflict, because it denies them the reaction that would validate their attempt at control. This is why those who remain visibly unbothered by insults are perceived, almost universally, as holding more power than those who respond with visible anger, regardless of the actual substance of the exchange. Section 25. The trap of wanting to be understood. There is a deep human craving to be fully understood, to be seen, to have one's inner complexity recognized by another person. This craving, while natural, is also one of the most exploitable vulnerabilities in existence, because it creates a willingness to lower defenses for anyone who appears to offer that understanding. Skilled manipulators specifically simulate deep understanding, mirroring language, reflecting emotions, performing empathy, precisely to trigger this craving and gain access to information that would otherwise remain protected. Recognizing this trap does not require abandoning the desire to be known. It requires recognizing how rarely that desire is met with genuine intent rather than strategic performance. Section 26. How strategic silence differs from avoidance. It is important to distinguish disciplined silence from emotional avoidance, because they can appear identical from the outside while serving opposite functions. Avoidance is silence driven by fear, an inability to confront a topic, a retreat from discomfort. Strategic silence is silence driven by calculation, a deliberate withholding chosen because speech, at that moment, would cost more than it would gain. The undisciplined person who mistakes avoidance for strategy ends up accumulating unresolved tension and unmanaged relationships. The disciplined person uses silence as a tool precisely because they have already done the internal work of understanding what they feel. They are simply choosing not to broadcast it. Section 27. Why Machiavelli believed reputation mattered more than truth. Machiavelli argued, controversially, that what a ruler appears to be matters more to most observers than what a ruler actually is, because the overwhelming majority of people interact with reputation rather than reality. They see actions and outcomes, not internal motivations. This insight extends directly to personal discipline. The reputation you cultivate through consistent, controlled behavior becomes, for most people who encounter you, indistinguishable from your actual character, simply because they lack access to anything beneath the surface. This is not an invitation to deceive, but a recognition that the curated self is, functionally, the only self most people will ever interact with. Section 28. The loneliness embedded in this discipline. It would be dishonest to present this discipline as costless. The capacity to remain unread, to withhold reaction, to deploy vulnerability only strategically, inevitably creates distance between you and those who crave full transparency as proof of intimacy. People who practice this level of control often report a particular kind of isolation, not because they are incapable of connection, but because genuine connection, by most conventional definitions, requires exactly the kind of unguarded exposure this discipline is built to prevent. This is not framed here as a tragedy to be solved. It is presented as the actual price of the power being described, a price every serious student of strategic behavior eventually has to weigh for themselves. Section 29. Discipline without cruelty. There is a meaningful distinction between becoming unreadable as a defensive discipline and becoming unreadable as a tool of predation. Machiavelli's writing is often reduced to a justification for cruelty, but the deeper reading reveals something more precise. The control of information and emotional display is a survival mechanism in an environment where most actors are, consciously or not, attempting to extract advantage from one another. Using this discipline to protect your own position is not inherently exploitative. Using it specifically to locate and harvest the vulnerabilities of others crosses into a different category entirely, one this analysis does not endorse, even as it explains the mechanics by which it operates. Section 30. The permanent state of controlled distance. What emerges from all of this is not a technique to be applied situationally, but a permanent orientation toward the world, a default state of controlled distance that governs how information is shared, how emotion is displayed, how trust is extended, and how vulnerability is rationed. This state is not achieved once and maintained automatically. It requires continuous conscious recalibration, because the pull toward transparency, toward immediate reaction, toward being fully known, is constant and deeply rooted in human wiring. The unreadable individual is not someone without depth. They are someone who has decided, deliberately and repeatedly, who is permitted to see that depth, and under what conditions, and at what cost to themselves if that decision is ever made carelessly. You will not become unreadable by deciding to be unreadable. You will become unreadable by removing, one habit at a time, the small daily concessions you make to the comfort of others, the reflexive smile that doesn't match what you feel, the explanation no one actually demanded, the reaction you give simply because silence felt unbearable. Machiavelli did not write for the comfortable. He wrote for those who understood that the world rewards composure and punishes exposure, regardless of how unfair that arrangement might feel. Whether you choose to build this discipline is not a question this analysis will answer for you. But understand this. Somewhere, right now, someone is reading you, your face, your tone, your patterns, and calculating exactly how to use what they find. The only question that remains is whether you intend to keep handing them the material,